Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit more about cellular respiration. Friday I introduced it to you using the star diagram notes, and that's just, a basic overview of cellular respiration. Now we're going to get into a little bit more detail, just like we did with photosynthesis last week. The important thing here, guys, is just to remember that if you understand photosynthesis, which hopefully you do, that cellular respiration is going to be pretty easy because it's just the opposite of photosynthesis. Okay? So remember, in photosynthesis, the plant is able to take the sun's energy and trap it in the chloroplast using the pigment chlorophyll and use that kinetic energy in the sunlight to make food molecules out of carbon dioxide and water. And in that food molecule glucose that it makes, it stores a lot of potential energy. And a waste product that is produced is oxygen. So here in cellular respiration, we've got the opposite happening. We're actually going to start with glucose and oxygen reacting in the mitochondria and releasing carbon dioxide and water. And when that glucose is broken apart, since it's such a good molecule for storing all that potential energy and all those chemical bonds, a lot of energy is released. Now here's the trick. The trick is the energy cannot be used by the cell to do anything. Okay? The energy has to be stored in another molecule called ATP. It's kind of like trying to go to another country and spend American dollars. The glucose would be American money that maybe you're trying to spend in France or Germany. Well, France and Germany, those stores don't take American dollars. They take euros. So the best thing to do is to change it to a euro first and then try and spend your money. So that's kind of what the cell has to do. It has to take the potential energy in glucose and change it into a different form of potential energy in a molecule called ATP, which is what the cell can then spend to do activities. Okay, and we'll be talking a lot more about ATP. Right now, let's just focus on the equation. So, glucose is C6H12O6, has a lot of potential energy in it, plus 6 oxygen molecules, equals or yields 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 water molecules plus ATPs, which also have a lot of potential energy in it. And just remember, this is the opposite of photosynthesis. So these are the reactants of cellular respiration. They were the products of photosynthesis. These are the products of cellular respiration, and this is what you started with, your reactants for photosynthesis. Okay? Just like photosynthesis occurred in 2 steps, the light and the dark reactions, cellular respiration also has steps. It has 3 steps. The 3 steps I'm going to simplify pretty much as just focusing on whether or not oxygen is present. Okay? So here's our 3 steps. Here's our reactants, glucose and oxygen. The 3 steps of the reaction to get to the products, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP energy. Okay? The first step actually can occur without oxygen. You don't need any oxygen for this first step to occur. So it's called anaerobic, which means without oxygen. It also can be called fermentation, and those are just 2 words that mean the same thing, without oxygen, occurring without oxygen. The next 2 steps, you need oxygen. If you don't have oxygen, you can't do these 2 steps. The reaction stops at the first step. Okay? So these 2 steps are aerobic, meaning with oxygen present. Okay? And we're going to talk about what happens in those steps. So let's focus on step 1 first. The first step is anaerobic. and it's also called fermentation because it means without oxygen. The glucose starts to break down. It's broken in half, basically. It's not completely broken down. Now, here's two examples of where this happens. One is in yeast, and we're going to do a lab with yeast later in the week. And the yeast, once it does that first step, called fermentation in this case, the products are carbon dioxide and water, like we would expect, and a third product, since the glucose is not broken down all the way. The third product is ethyl alcohol. And we don't get a lot of energy out of our glucose because we're not breaking it down all the way. We only get enough to make 2 ATP molecules, which isn't very much. If you break down glucose all the way, you can get 36 ATP molecules out of it. So there's a lot of energy in that glucose. But without oxygen, you can't get that energy out. You only get enough energy to make 2 ATPs. Now, why are yeast interesting in this case? Well, yeasts are used in baking. And this product right here, the carbon dioxide, is what a baker is interested in. If you're baking bread, one of the things you do is you mix the dough, the flour, the sugar, the yeast, and you let it rise. It rises because the yeast is actually using the sugar and doing anaerobic respiration or fermentation with it and producing carbon dioxide, and that's why the dough puffs up like that. It's actually a bunch of carbon dioxide gas that is causing the dough to rise. So bakers are very interested in this process. Another person that might be interested in this process is somebody who makes beer at home brewers, okay? They're not so much interested in these products as this one. Home brewers are making beer. They're interested in their product having alcohol in it. And this is the alcohol that beer has. So ethyl alcohol would be the product that somebody is using yeast in their beer process to make their homemade beer. Okay? Now, another time this happens is in your own body, in your muscle cells. If you think about a time in gym class, maybe when you had to run the mile, and when you start out, you're running the mile, everything's going great, you're talking with your friend as you go around the track or wherever you're running, and everything's fine. When you can talk to a person in exercise, you are exercising aerobically. That means you have enough oxygen available. If you're not used to running, however, pretty soon your body switches to an anaerobic state. That means it's very difficult to talk to your friend. You're out of breath. You're gasping for air. You're breathing pretty hard. Okay? If that happens, you are exercising without enough oxygen. You're still producing carbon dioxide, which you're exhaling. You're producing water, which you're sweating out. And you're also producing something that's getting stuck in your muscles called lactic acid. The lactic acid can cause pain and discomfort if it's not broken down. So once you're done with the mile, your gym teacher says, okay, go walk a lap and do some stretches. That's really important because it's going to allow you to break down that lactic acid, and actually the stretching physically pushes it out of the muscle cells and into your blood where it can be broken down a little bit more easily. So this is the stuff that causes the pain the next day in your muscles after you've exercised when you're not used to that, doing that mile or doing that exercise, okay? So that's another interesting part of anaerobic respiration. Okay, so that's the first step. The first step is without oxygen. Now, to complete the whole process, you got to go down 2 more steps. Steps 2 and 3, though, need oxygen. If you don't have oxygen, you can't do steps 2 and 3. You're stuck on step 1, and you won't get very much energy out of your glucose. You'll only get 2 ATPs. So we want to be able to have oxygen available, and that'll break the glucose down completely, and it'll release a heck of a lot more energy, 36 ATPs as opposed to just 2. And that's going to help our bodies. Now, why is ATP so important? Because our body cells can't use the potential energy in glucose directly. The glucose energy must be changed into ATP, which the cell can use. And that's going back to my little analogy of if you're traveling out of the country and you have American money, your first stop should be the bank where you're going to change it for euros or whatever currency that you need in that country. It's like the glucose is American money. You can't spend it in France, okay? You have to go to the bank and change it into euros before you could spend it in France, okay? So that's all your body is doing in these last two steps of aerobic respiration. It is using the oxygen to completely break the glucose down, and then the last thing is it is taking that energy in the glucose and storing it in another molecule which the body can easily spend as an energy resource. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this ATP molecule. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and tri means 3. So we've got 3 phosphates. This represents adenosine and 3 phosphates. These squiggly lines I'm calling high energy bonds because an ATP molecule has the ability to store a lot of potential energy in those special bonds. So think of ATP kind of like a charged battery. It stores energy in its bonds, and that energy is potential energy because it's stored energy. And by breaking those bonds, by breaking these high energy bonds, we can actually release the energy and then use it. And then it's kinetic energy that the cell can use to do things. Breaking the bond removes a phosphate, which results in ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Di means 2. So ADP is kind of like a battery that's low and needs to be recharged. So if you think about it, think about your cell phone. Okay, probably most of us plug our cell phones in at night and they charge overnight. So when we get up in the morning, we have a fully charged battery on our phone. It's like ATP. It's fully charged. It's got a lot of energy stored in the phone. Okay? All day long, we use the phone. Okay? We're calling, we're texting, we're searching the internet, we're using our phone. That's a use of kinetic energy that was stored in the battery. Well, the battery signal gets weaker and weaker, right? And pretty soon it needs to be recharged. That's like an ADP molecule now. It needs to be recharged. So what do we do when we get home? We put our phone back on the charger and we recharge it for the next day. And that's exactly what your cell is doing with ATP molecules. Your cell takes ATP and charges it simply by putting that phosphate back on. Okay, so if you are using an ATP, you remove a phosphate and you recharge it by putting the phosphate back on. Just like plugging your cell phone in recharges your battery, you take it off the charger, you use your phone, and then you got to plug it back in again. So it's a cycle that happens. It's called the ATP cycle. It's part of cellular respiration. It goes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's how our cells recharge their batteries. So it looks something like this. ATP is a charged battery, lots of potential energy in it, whereas ADP has lost a phosphate, that's why it's separated, and it's a battery in need of charging. It's low. It needs to be charged up. How did it get from charged to low? It was used. Energy was used by the cell. That's kinetic energy. So this potential energy in the ATP was used by the cell, just like the potential energy in your cell phone battery is used by you all day long. So your battery gets low. Then you go home at night, you plug your phone in. Well, our cells don't plug their phones in. Our cells reattach this phosphate. But to do that, you need to put energy in. Where does the energy come from to put this phosphate back on? Glucose. Okay? So that's where glucose comes into this. The kinetic energy, the potential energy in glucose is used to reattach that phosphate and change ADP back to ATP and recharge the battery. So it's something that's going on all the time. We use the battery, then we use our food to recharge the battery. Use it, food recharges it. Okay? Constant. All day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time. And that is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration's goal is to make ATPs that can be used by our cells to do their everyday activities. What kind of everyday activities? Well, they have to grow, they have to develop, they have to reproduce, they have to do other processes, they have to digest things, they have to stay healthy. Okay? There's all kinds of things our cells do. Our cells are an extension of us. So whatever we need to do, our cells are doing. So if we're moving, we're thinking, we're breathing, our cells are doing that. And that's what the energy is needed for. Okay? Well, this week you're going to do a couple of labs. You're going to learn more about ATP. You're going to do a cell respiration lab with yeast. And I think you're going to enjoy those labs and have a good time with them. Hopefully you understand this. And I'm going to put this on Aspen so you can watch it again if you need to. Please, again, remember to email me if you have any questions or concerns, okay? Good luck with this material. I think you can handle it and, do a good job. Just keep up the good work, guys, okay? I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.